Thanks very much. Okay, slides working all right. So, as has been shown by other speakers, we're meant to be reviewing what's happened since Helsinki and sort of evaluating outcomes or progress against the points that were highlighted in the output paper from that. So I was in the theme 4 at Helsinki. At that time, I was working for the Royal Veterinary College with Dan and Rowena. The session at that time was entitled Does the Colour Matter? Defining Breed versus Variety. But the discussions that we had didn't actually end up really being about colour at all. And so when I was asked to report today, I said, can we just sort of not talk about colour that much? And Amy said, fine. So that's why we've moved on to breed versus variety, which really reflects more what the conversations in Helsinki actually concerned. And these are the 5 priorities and planned actions from Helsinki that appeared in the output paper that I just showed you. I'm not going to read them all out because you can all read just as well as I can. But if you just look through the points that are listed here, you'll see that the first 4 are all quite specific. And then at the bottom, we have the big one that all stakeholders should give more attention to work to increase genetic diversity in dog breeds, which is obviously about as broad as you can get. So I'm going to be talking through what the different organisations are currently doing as far as I've been able to establish it. But I need to just put in the caveat that these 2 more specific points certainly do need addressing, because in trying to prepare for this presentation, I found that it was actually really quite hard to gather information about what is happening in different countries, except by drawing on the personal contact that I already had. And as I'll show you, there still is a great deal of need for harmonisation on what's actually considered a variety and where the rules are implemented. So this certainly is an area that's fairly chaotic still, and where there's a lot of work to be done on ensuring we are all singing from the same hymn sheet. And I just want to add another note before I go any further, that for reasons of time, I'm really only focusing on what's being done by organisations affiliated with official kennel clubs in each country. Of course, I'm aware that there's a lot of grassroots outcrossing and crossbreeding projects. I'm not saying that those shouldn't be considered, just they're beyond the scope of what I can possibly address in 15 minutes. So just a quick note on scope for those who, another quick note on scope for those who weren't at the talk in Helsinki, the discussions in Helsinki, that this key output question, all stakeholders should be giving more attention to work to increase genetic diversity in dog breeds. Increasing diversity, obviously, involves introducing new genetic material to a breed. So maintaining, or as my colleague Joanna Ilska reminds me, reducing loss of, which is the best you can realistically hope for in this context, genetic diversity within a closed register breed is obviously also really important, but it's different. And that's out of scope for today. Of course, it's really important to reduce the use of popular sires, increase the number of individuals that contribute to the next generation, and so on. But that's not what will be discussed at Helsinki, and not what I'm talking about today, and nor were ways to monitor, control, or plan for the maintenance or reduce of loss of genetic diversity. Not that these things aren't important, but that I can't cover them right now. So, thinking specifically about increasing genetic diversity, there are really 3 to 4 ways of doing this, depending how you define your boundaries. So you can reopen or increase the flexibility of closed registry systems, that is adding unregistered dogs that are visibly of the same breed. So it looks like a Labrador, but it doesn't have the right paperwork. You can facilitate crossbreeding between related breed varieties, such as between the different varieties of Belgian Shepherd or different sizes of Poodle, in order to move genes about between related breed subgroups, sub-varieties. And then there's formal outcrossing programs, which really can have 3 purposes: to increase genetic diversity as an aim in itself, to specifically address an issue with health in a certain breed, such as the LUA Dalmatian project, or to address issues with extreme conformation, as is particularly being done in some places with brachycephalic breeds at the moment. And then the fourth one, which again I'm not going to talk about, I seem to be spending this whole briefing drawing boundaries, is increasing diversity within a national population through importation. Obviously, if it's a closed register breed, that can't increase global diversity, and it may not be useful even on a national level if the imported dogs are not sufficiently distinct genetically, which may be masked if your pedigrees aren't complete enough. But nevertheless, it is a route that can be helpful in some circumstances. So just going back to the first of those points, reopening or increasing flexibility of closed registry systems. So there are really three aspects to this: the education and discussion phase. Do people understand how we got here, what the situation is, what should we be doing about it? The regulatory aspect, what's currently possible or proposed in different countries, and the uptake aspect, which is obviously what's actually happening on the ground. And when we're thinking about the education and discussion phase, there's understanding the history and the potential benefits of reopening registries, and also, of course, what the potential problems might be. So the reason that the history gets in here is that I presented on this at Helsinki, where I made the point that at least in the UK, breed registers were originally completely open. At the time, a year ago, this seemed to be news to a lot of people, and the message is sort of getting out more now, at least within the academic world, but I think wider understanding is still needed. For those who haven't heard me present on this here or there during the year, which I have in a couple of venues, I'll be speaking on this in a Kennel Club online free webinar on the 10th of June, which will also be available on the Kennel Club's YouTube channel thereafter. But I'm conscious that although it's quite helpful that it's my research here, given that the UK was the first kennel club and others, particularly in the Anglophone world, were modelled on their practices, we don't actually know, as far as I'm aware, what the original situation with breed registers was in other countries. And it would be really helpful to have some other people go into the archives and have a look at this and come back and tell us. There certainly is far more international awareness of the possibilities around reopening breed registers in one way or another. We could tell that from the simple reason that Amy had to keep people off the subject yesterday because everyone was so keen to talk about it when it wasn't the chief matter at hand. As you can see from recent publications like the Prochalski paper that came out in January, there's increasing deliberate foregrounding of this within the academic community and within the dog community as well. Where we haven't got so far is sharing the evidence from the projects that have gone on so far and establishing protocols for how to do this. Although we know that some countries are already doing it and others are considering it, the information on the sort of nitty-gritty details has not necessarily been shared so publicly. And it's also important to remember that closed registers aren't the only issue, because inbreeding can also happen in open register breeds, and there's been some work on this too. When we're thinking about the problems, these can really be divided into biological problems, the introduction of new diseases into gene pools that have been carefully selected to avoid them, the changing of type or temperament, which is something that many breed communities are really worried about because they're concerned that the predictability of the breed that they favour will be impaired by introducing new biological material, and how you maximise the benefit of this. If you go to all this effort, how can you then avoid heavy selection back into the original breed type or the use of popular sires so that you maintain the gain that you've achieved? That's, of course, partly a human factor problem, and fear of change, betraying breed heritage, and inertia or reluctance to engage with this sort of initiative are human problems that definitely have to be dealt with if this sort of thing is to improve dog health. Then, considering the regulation and uptake of reopening the breed registers, it's quite difficult to find information about this. Again, I'm not going to read out every word on this slide. In the UK, we've technically had the unverified parentage route since 2011, which has a set of fairly transparent requirements to introduce new material into breeds which are particularly thought to need it. But the scheme has had extremely limited uptake so far. There just isn't very much demand. In Finland and Sweden, there are schemes that, as far as I can tell, and I may have got this wrong, seem fairly similar in that there is exemption registration possible technically for all breeds, which is not that different in the details from the UK model. But then there are also specifically dedicated open registers for certain breeds, which are a sort of entry route where outcrossing or unregistered parentage is more easily accepted. In Denmark, the registers have very recently been opened for bulldogs, French bulldogs, and pugs, specifically in order to improve brachycephalic conformation by allowing dogs in that have better respiratory abilities. And it looks like something very similar is just happening in Germany with pugs. In the AKC, as far as I could see from the website, the route in is sort of for traditional breeds that may have a sort of working breed club or a heritage breed club that is a sort of route into the AKC rather than a more recent initiative that's intended for health. And in the Canadian Kennel Club, there are currently no routes other than the importation of dogs registered with other international organisations, which of course applies also to all the others I've already mentioned. And of course, there are many kennel clubs I haven't mentioned, and that's because I wasn't able to find out in the time I had available what they may or may not be doing. So I'm sorry for those omissions. Facilitating crossbreeding between related breed varieties. Obviously, this only applies to breeds where there are related breed varieties. And the FCI, for those who don't know, the Fédération Cynologique Internationale, which regulates kennel clubs across many European and international countries, but not the KC or the North American kennel clubs, has a list of approved crosses and cautions that it developed in 2023, which is quite comprehensive. So I've only pulled out a couple of highlights here. Really, the parameters they've drawn up seem very sensible in that, for example, they don't allow crossing between toy and standard poodles, but they do between toys and miniatures, which seems very pragmatic to me. And they allow more flexibility than the other organisations, as far as I can see. In the KC, we allow free crossbreeding currently between different coat types in Chihuahuas. And as you can see here, certain other parameters are implemented, but with some restrictions. It's not an open thing. In the AKC, as far as I could work out from the website, they will allow inter-variety crossbreeding for poodles, but not Belgian Shepherds, and not otherwise for other breeds, as far as I was able to establish. And the Canadian Kennel Club seems to be more flexible. It has restrictions on dachshunds that are just based on recessive coat type, similarly to the UK. But otherwise, they seem to allow more interbreeding between related breeds than anywhere else except the FCI that I know about. Clearly, this shows you that there's still no consistency between countries and regulatory bodies on what counts as a breed or variety, and whether those definitions are made on coat type, colour or size is not standardised. So clearly, as suggested at Helsinki, there's still a lot of work that could be done on standardising this internationally if we chose to do so. Moving on to formal outcrossing programs to increase genetic diversity. This is a pretty quick whiz through of what I was able to find out about. And as I've said at the top in the heading there, the little star or asterisk on these lists indicates where these programs are intended to address conformational issues as well as issues of genetic diversity. So in the UK, we're currently developing behind-the-scenes registration support for the Leogen project, which is, of course, an international project. So we're doing our UK part to support that. And we would certainly support similar applications for outcrossing programs from other breed communities. In Finland, they have this formalised programme for these various breeds, some for genetic diversity, some also for conformation, and a slightly shorter list from Sweden. In Norway, I only know about the Norwegian Lundehund. Perhaps there are other projects I missed. In Netherlands, it's the Veterinary. In Germany, they've just opened one for the French Bulldog, so far just with the Papillon as far as I know, but I'm sure I've got the details wrong there. And in North America, I was not aware of any outcrossing projects. Developing and future work, again, I only know about what I'm personally been involved with. So at the Kennel Club, we currently have 2 major internal reviews. I'm leading one on overall provision and Joanna's leading one on population genetics. So they both touch on genetic diversity. We're both doing a lot of stakeholder consultation, and we'll be publishing reports later this year, which will eventually join up together to inform our future internal actions. There's also collaboration informally between some international kennel clubs, which we've been involved with to compare current provision and try and improve knowledge about this. But I don't know what's happening on the table in the future in other countries, so do please tell us in the discussion. So to conclude, how are we doing on the Helsinki action points? I've reordered them here to start with the big one. So I think it's clear from the discussion at this event and throughout the year that there definitely is more attention to increase work in genetic diversity in dog breeds. And this really is a hot topic where there's a lot of current progress and discussion. In terms of webinars, I'm not aware of any on this subject at Dog Wellnet. I certainly have been doing a fair few on the history of breeding, and I would love to know if people are doing webinars on crossbreeding, because it would be really helpful if we could share the knowledge from the people who are pioneering this on the ground already. The devil is always in the detail and the practice with these things. As I explained earlier, there's not a great deal of readily shared information on how crossbreeding rules and terminology are actually played out in the ground, and it would be really helpful if we could use Dog Wellnet as a centre point where this sort of information was gathered more accessibly. And I think while there is some talk and some move towards increased crossbreeding between varieties and outcrossing and unregistered parentage, as I've mentioned, the extent to which this is actually on the ground and being discussed and actively being implemented certainly is still varying, and where there's room for more implementation in many countries. Thank you very much for your time.